What does the Eiffel Tower conceal? A military laboratory. Hello, dear friends, truth seekers and collectors of forgotten stories. Today we're embarking on a journey that may forever alter your perception of Paris's most iconic symbol, that very airy structure of iron and light which millions photograph, admiring its elegance, without suspecting for a moment that before them stands not merely an architectural masterpiece, but perhaps the most ingeniously disguised military installation of the late 19th century, whose true mission was hidden behind the facade of a festive exhibition arch, and whose salvation from imminent demolition for scrap metal in 1909 was secured not by public affection, but by the cold calculation of military strategists who recognized its extraordinary value for intercepting enemy communications and commanding their own troops. What if I told you that each of the 18,000 metal components, each of the 2.5 million rivets driven into the structure by 300 workers over the record-breaking span of 2 years, 2 months, and 5 days, was designed not only to withstand wind loads and its own 10,000-ton weight, but also to create an ideal platform for antennas capable, as it turned out, of transmitting signals up to 4,000 kilometers, transforming Paris into the hub of an invisible yet exceptionally powerful communications network capable of deciding the outcomes of future wars long before the first soldiers ever took the field. We will trace the footsteps of Gustave Eiffel, not just an innovative engineer, but a man whose biography is deeply intertwined with military projects, and whose father, himself a former officer, left military service only to assist his wife in the family business, perhaps instilling in the future creator of the tower not only a love of the exact sciences, but also a profound understanding of his country's military needs. And we will discover how in January 1887 that very contract was signed between Eiffel, the French state, and the Paris municipality, which at first glance granted the engineer a 20-year operating lease, guaranteeing him all visitor revenues, yet in reality very likely contained secret annexes, obligating Eiffel to make the structure available for military testing and research immediately after the exhibition season ended, turning a temporary exhibit into a permanent strategic asset. We will delve into the mysterious story of Captain Gustave Ferrié, that very military engineer who, in 1903, just a few years after the tower's inauguration, began using it for his experiments in wireless telegraphy and, according to some sources, operated with the personal backing and funding of Eiffel himself, transforming the upper floors into a secret laboratory where technologies capable of altering the course of world history were born. And we will certainly step inside that very secret apartment at the very summit, the point where tourist routes end and a zone inaccessible to outsiders begins, a space which, according to several researchers, was built specifically for scientific experiments and meetings with high-ranking military officials, and not for romantic retreats, as tour guides so often like to claim. We will examine the theory that the first experiments conducted by Eugene Ducretet in October 1898, when he successfully transmitted a radio message from the Eiffel Tower to the Pantheon 4 kilometers away, were merely a cover for far more ambitious and classified work on radio interception and targeting systems, and that the sudden extension of the lease by 70 years in January 1910, just 1 year before the official expiration of the original term, was not a gesture of gratitude for cultural contributions, but a necessary measure dictated by mounting military threats and the undeniable practical value of the structure as an unrivaled radio mast complex. we will scrutinize every argument, every detail of the official version, and compare it with inconvenient facts hidden in archives and only briefly mentioned in contemporaries' memoirs, so that together, step by step, we can unravel what truly lies behind the legend of La Dame de Fer and determine whether its construction was a brilliant engineering feat undertaken in the name of enlightenment and progress, or one of the most successful and large-scale disinformation campaigns in human history whose echoes are still felt in every photograph taken against the backdrop of this majestic, if perhaps deceptive, symbol. So let us begin our story at the very moment when a bold idea first took shape in the minds of several engineers capable of shaking the world. According to the official version, it all began with a celebration, France's desire to shine at the 1889 World's Fair, held to mark the centenary of the French Revolution, and to demonstrate to the world its technical and engineering superiority, which is why a competition was announced for a grand entrance structure on the Champ de Mars, the very site that had once served as a field for military maneuvers, named after the Roman god of war, and where a military academy had recently been built, a detail that itself invites certain reflections on the placement of a future symbol of peace and progress. The idea of constructing the world's tallest tower did not, contrary to popular belief, originate with Gustave Eiffel himself, but with his two talented engineers, Maurice Koechlin and Émile Nouguier, who developed the initial design, while the architect Stephen Silvestre refined and finalized its architectural appearance. Only then did Gustave Eiffel, recognizing the project's potential, buy the patent from his colleagues and claim it as his own, presenting it in 1885 to the Society of Civil Engineers as a bold proposal. The structure itself represented a technological breakthrough, for at that time high-rise buildings were only just beginning to appear, primarily in America, while in Europe such dimensions, 300 meters tall, seemed pure fantasy. Yet Eiffel's calculations, based on the use of puddled iron, a refined wrought iron, and the ingenious lattice tower design which allowed wind to pass freely through the structure, minimizing resistance and reducing stress on the foundations, proved flawless. Construction began on January 28, 1887, and proceeded at a staggering pace, thanks to prefabricated components produced at Eiffel's factory in the Paris suburbs and a unique assembly method resembling a giant construction set. Each of the 18,000 parts bore its own unique number and had to be placed in its precisely designated location, requiring the driving of no fewer than 2.5 million rivets, all accomplished with remarkable precision and without a single fatal accident on site, a phenomenon truly unparalleled for that era and scale. Yet even then, during construction, a storm of indignation erupted in the press and among Paris's cultural elite. Famous writers, artists, and architects signed a petition denouncing the tower as a shapeless bell tower, a melancholy street lamp mast, and a desecration of Paris, predicting for it only fleeting fame and swift oblivion. And curiously enough, they were largely correct in their forecasts regarding the structure's original lifespan. For according to the signed agreement, the tower was to be dismantled and sold for scrap after 20 years of operation, that is, in 1909. And this was no secret to anyone. It was a universally accepted and indisputable fact confirmed by all official documents. So why then were such colossal funds, efforts, and reputational risks invested in building such a monumental but clearly temporary structure if its fate had been predetermined from the outset? And doesn't it strike you as somewhat odd that so ambitious a project, meant to glorify France for centuries, was initially conceived as a fleeting, if spectacular, exhibition prop? This is where the most intriguing part of our story begins, the part official historians prefer to call a fortunate coincidence, while conspiracy theorists label it a coldly calculated operation. The fact is that almost immediately after construction ended and the tower opened to the public on May 15, 1889, an entirely different life began on its upper floors, hidden from tourists and ordinary Parisians alike. As early as 1880, when the tower was still just lines on a blueprint, Gustave Eiffel, known not only as a builder of bridges and viaducts, but also as a passionate scientist, had taken an interest in the newly discovered phenomena of electromagnetism, and this far-sighted man understood that his future tower could become an ideal experimental platform for these then cutting-edge investigations. On the third floor, he installed a meteorological laboratory where he personally conducted experiments on air resistance, atmospheric pressure, and wind speed at high altitudes, gathering data not out of mere scientific curiosity, but directly relevant to aerodynamics and thus to the future development of aviation, a field still in its fragile infancy, where each unit of measurement could hold the key to success. However, the real breakthrough, the final drop needed to convince the authorities to preserve the tower, came in October 1898, when inventor Eugene Ducretet conducted Paris's first radio telegraphy session between the Eiffel Tower and the Pantheon, spanning 4 kilometers and proving that height was the decisive factor in the range and quality of wireless communication. This seemingly purely scientific event did not go unnoticed by military circles, for by then Europe was already sensing the looming threat of a large-scale conflict, and every nation frantically sought technological advantages that might tip the balance in its favor. It was at this point that a figure emerged around whom much of the conspiracy theories revolve: Captain Jules Gustave Ferrie, an officer in the French Army Corps of Engineers, who in 1903 began using the tower for military wireless experiments. Some sources claim it was Eiffel himself who proposed to General Ferrié that the tower be placed at the disposal of military engineers, and that this step was taken not out of patriotic sentiment, but as part of a long-term strategy to save his creation from demolition, for he understood perfectly well that the scientific value of a laboratory would hardly persuade city authorities, whereas military necessity was an altogether different argument, one beyond discussion. Captain Ferré's persona remains shrouded in mystery. His biography offers few details, and there is no definitive information on how close his collaboration with Eiffel truly was. Yet the fact that regular military tests began on the tower from 1903 onward is indisputable, and by 1906 a permanent military radio station was already operating there, while in 1908 the first experimental broadcast of recorded music took place, a detail that, again, may be interpreted as an attempt to mask actual military communications nodes under the guise of peaceful activity. All these events form a single, logical sequence in which scientific experiments serve as cover for military development, and the public image of the tower as an ugly duckling or scientific laboratory creates the perfect backdrop for its true purpose. Now let us turn to that decisive moment, the year 1909, when the lease was due to expire and the tower was supposed to be dismantled. Archival documents confirm that Gustave Eiffel, according to the contract, was indeed obligated to dismantle the tower, and for him this was not just a legal formality, but also a matter of enormous financial loss, since he had invested about 80% of the total cost, approximately 5.3 million francs, out of a total of 7.8 million, receiving from the city only a modest subsidy and the right to collect visitor revenues for 20 years. It would seem that after 20 years of successful operation and full return on investment, the structure could have been calmly dismantled for scrap, yielding additional profit from the metal sale. But Eiffel chose a far riskier path. He and his allies within the military began an active campaign promoting the tower's irreplaceable scientific and, more importantly, military value. Their arguments were simple and compelling. The tower was an ideal platform for radio communication, as proven by numerous experiments by Ducretet and Ferrie, and its height provided a range unattainable by any other ground-based stations of the time. While debates over preservation or demolition unfolded on paper, a 6-meter radio antenna was already operating at the summit, and military engineers were developing increasingly sophisticated technologies capable of intercepting telegrams over great distances. And in January 1910, just months before the Lease exploration, Paris authorities made a historic decision. Eiffel's contract was extended for a full 70 years, and the tower was officially recognized as a valuable national asset, essential for military communications. This decision became the turning point, after which the fate of La Dame de Fer was definitively sealed, and it was never again considered a temporary structure. Subsequently, during the First World War, the tower fully justified the hopes placed upon it, becoming a key element of French radio intelligence. Thanks to it, enemy messages were successfully intercepted and decoded, contributing, according to some estimates, decisively to France's victory at the Battle of the Marne in 1914. And it was precisely because of its strategic importance that the tower was spared from German occupation plans. When Paris fell in 1940, German troops were unable to hoist their flag at the summit, as French soldiers had previously cut the elevator cables, turning the ascent of 350 stairs into an insurmountable task for the invaders. All of this suggests that the tower was conceived and built from the outset with its future military role in mind. For otherwise, how can we explain the speed and determination with which it was saved, while all other temporary exhibition pavilions were ruthlessly dismantled without the slightest hesitation? It would seem the theory is fully proven, but there is one intriguing episode that adds yet another, even more mysterious layer to this story. We've already mentioned the secret apartment hidden at the very top of the Eiffel Tower, 285 meters above ground. A small room Eiffel built personally for himself, and which remained closed to the public for a long time. The official version claims Eiffel used this apartment for meetings with friends, scientific discussions, and escape from the bustle of the city. Wax figures of Eiffel himself and his guests, including the famous inventor Thomas Edison, who indeed visited Paris and met his French counterpart, remain there to this day. Yet, if one examines the location and layout of this apartment more closely, new questions arise. Why was this apartment concealed precisely on the third, highest level, where logically only technical rooms and antennas should have been located? And why was access restricted, with windows facing not the panoramic views of Paris, but toward the War Ministry and the Champ de Mars? Some researchers speculate that this apartment served not only as a private office, but also as a sort of command post or headquarters for coordinating military research. Its small, secluded rooms were ideally suited for secret meetings, discussing intercepted radio traffic and planning future operations. It is entirely possible that it was within these walls, over a cup of coffee and far from prying ears, that decisions were made that influenced the course of an entire nation's scientific and military programs. Eiffel, having invested a significant portion of his own funds in the project, sought to prove that his tower was not just an ornament, but a functional, vital platform for science and defense. And the secret apartment became a symbol of this dual purpose, a place where the worlds of public recognition and classified military development intersected. Moreover, there are references to another hidden level, located between the second and third floors, known only to a few, and which, according to some, may have housed sensitive equipment or served as a buffer zone to ensure the secrecy of the main research operations at the summit. All this indicates that the tower's design was meticulously planned down to the smallest detail, and that every element, every staircase landing and ventilation hatch had a strictly defined purpose that extended far beyond a festive arch for the World's Fair. It was a multifaceted, versatile structure, capable of adapting its role to circumstances, and Eiffel's secret apartment is merely the most visible tip of the iceberg. The submerged portion, comprising military development, closed laboratories, and secret contracts, remains hidden from our eyes to this day. Finally, let us summarize this story, which, as we see, consists not of a single narrative thread, but of several interwoven layers of truth. Undoubtedly, the Eiffel Tower is a revolutionary engineering achievement, a symbol of French progress, a triumph of engineering genius, and a cultural icon that has become the calling card of Paris and France as a whole. It has inspired generations of architects, artists, and dreamers worldwide. Yet at the same time, it stands as evidence of how great historical events, science, and military strategy intertwine in the most unexpected places. The story of the tower's construction is, in my view, less an example of conspiracy and more a brilliant multi-step strategy, ingeniously planned by Gustave Eiffel, likely with unofficial but highly significant support from the French military command. Eiffel built not just a tower, he created a platform for the future, a universal tool that first brought him fame, then saved him from financial ruin, secured his legacy for centuries, and simultaneously granted his country an undeniable strategic advantage in the trials to come. He played several moves ahead, anticipating technological and political developments, and staked everything, including his reputation, on realizing his vision. There is nothing shameful in this. On the contrary, it is an example of astonishing foresight and cold calculation. Therefore, the next time you see the Eiffel Tower in a photograph, or even better, stand beneath its majestic arches, try to look at it not only as an object of admiration, but also as a living, breathing page of history teeming with secrets, as a monument not only to engineering ingenuity, but also to shrewd diplomacy, not only to peace, but also to preparation for war, not only to enlightenment, but also to defense. Every metal beam, every turn of its staircase preserves not just the story of its construction, but echoes of those closed meetings, those first radio signals, those anxious days before the great upheavals that shook the world in the 20th century. This is the true, profound magic of this structure. It is simultaneously simple and incredibly complex, open and secretive, light and extraordinarily strong. So, dear friends, I urge you not to stop here, not to limit yourselves to the version of events presented in tourist brochures and on official websites. Take this story as a starting point for your own little investigation. Dive into the archives, study the biographies of Eiffel, Ferrié, and Ducretet, find old blueprints and compare them with modern plans of the tower. And who knows, perhaps it will be you who discovers that missing piece of the puzzle, that secret document or hitherto unknown technical detail, which will finally shed full light on the one true, as yet unsaid reason why the Eiffel Tower was built. History awaits its investigators, and perhaps the next great discovery lies in wait for you, hidden behind one of those countless rivets on the world's most famous iron structure.